Imagine being a tiny human baby. You can't walk. You can't speak. You can't feed yourself. You can't manage your own body heat. You don't even know what a predator is, but they definitely know exactly what you are. You weigh around 3 kilograms. You are, honestly, plainly, a biological disaster waiting to happen. Yet, somehow, you actually have ancestors, thousands of generations of them, which means that at some point, a long chain of early humans figured out how to keep a creature as incredibly fragile as a newborn alive, not for a single day or week, but long enough to raise their own babies, again and again for 300,000 years. So, this question isn't just interesting. It is deeply personal. If just one of your direct ancestors had failed at parenting even once, you wouldn't be here watching this video right now. You would simply not exist. That is pretty unsettling when you think about it, but here is the crazy part, the secret too. How ancient humans kept children alive isn't just a list of old-school survival tips. It actually reveals some of the most advanced human social behavior ever to evolve on our planet. Habits that most of us never think about. Habits that, in many ways, we have quietly abandoned in our modern world, and we're paying the price now. Let us start with the obvious question. Nobody asks, why is giving birth so incredibly difficult in the first place? Most animals are born running, or at least walking. A baby giraffe drops nearly 2 meters to the ground, lands, gets up, and trots within an hour. A newborn horse is on its feet in under 2 hours. Even our closest relatives, chimpanzees, can cling tightly to their mothers almost immediately after being born. Human babies, absolutely not. A human newborn is totally helpless for months, utterly and completely dependent on other people for literally everything. And this is not just some design flaw. It is actually a very specific evolutionary trade-off with a special name. Researchers call it secondary ultraciality, which sounds like a made-up word, but it means something real. Human infants are born earlier in terms of their development than nearly any other primate. Why? Because of your brain. Here is the problem. Our brains are massive, not just compared to other animals, but even compared to what our bodies can theoretically support. A fully grown human brain at birth would need a skull so huge that it simply could not fit through the birth canal. So evolution did something rather clever and slightly horrifying. It made mothers give birth early. Human infants are basically born premature by design. At birth, your brain is only about 25% of its adult size. A baby chimpanzee is born at around 45%. This means a massive amount of our brain development, which normally takes other animals only weeks or months, takes humans years, and all of that growth must happen outside the safe womb, totally exposed to the world. While the infant is completely dependent on other people, this is often called the obstetric dilemma, and it means something critical. A human baby cannot survive alone, even theoretically. Not even for a few hours. Our species quite literally cannot reproduce successfully without community support, and this changes everything because it raises a massive question. How did early humans keeping kids alive is not about individual parenting skills. It is about how we act together, our social networks, and the strength of communities. And what our ancestors figured out was truly mind-blowing. We have all heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. It is quite a massive cliche these days. Folks throw it around at baby showers or print it on posters, but here is what most of us completely miss. In the reality of early human evolution, it was not some metaphor. It was literally a survival strategy, and it worked so well that scientists now believe this strategy is the main reason Homo sapiens outlived every other hominin species on Earth. This theory is called cooperative breeding. Let's look at how it works. For most apes and monkeys, parenting is almost entirely left up to the mother. Dads might help a little, but the real weight falls on her alone. Naturally, this limits how many babies she can raise since she can only handle a couple of dependent infants. At any one time, humans broke that mold completely in foraging. Tribes, which make up the bulk of our evolutionary history, raising kids was shared by the whole community, not as a nice favor and not just to be polite, but as a core part of how they survived. Grandmas played an incredibly vital role here, so vital, in fact, that scientists even developed a theory about it called, and you guessed it, the grandmother hypothesis. This theory, developed in the 1990s by anthropologist Kristen Hawkes, suggests that human menopause, which is actually super rare in the animal kingdom, evolved specifically to help older women stop having babies and pour their energy into the survival of their grandkids. Let that sink in for a moment. The idea is that women live for decades past their childbearing years, specifically because experienced grandmas are so valuable to a child's survival that evolution figured it was better to have them stop having babies and start helping raise everyone else's, and the data actually backs this up. Studies of traditional societies show that having a maternal grandmother around massively boosts child survival rates. In some groups, it is one of the biggest signs of whether a kid makes it past age 2. It was not just grandmas either. Aunts, uncles, older siblings, unrelated adults in the community, all of them pitched in with child care in ways you rarely see in other primate groups. Babies were passed around, held, carried, fed, and watched by multiple adults all day long. Researchers who study modern hunter-gatherers, which give us at least some glimpse into early human habits, report that in tribes like the aka of Central Africa, dads are within arm's reach of their babies about 47% of the time. 47%. That is more hands-on than most dads in modern societies today. The point is, this social structure surrounding ancient human kids was incredibly close-knit. Each child was wrapped in a web of connections, not just leaning on to parents. This was not philosophy, it was survival engineering. Now, let's discuss something that tends to make modern folks a bit uncomfortable. In early human societies, nursing looked nothing like what we think is normal today. First, duration. In ancient cultures and among our closest primate relatives, nursing usually went on for 2 to 4 years or even longer. The World Health Organization currently suggests nursing up to age 2 or more, which strikes many as surprising. But looking at human evolution, stopping before age 2 was actually highly unusual and potentially dangerous. Second, frequency. Hunter-gatherer mothers usually nursed their babies several times each hour during the day. Some studies suggest up to 4 feeds per hour in early infancy. This regular nursing serves several roles. It provides nutrition. It calms the baby's stress levels. Plus, it serves as a natural birth control, stopping ovulation and keeping births apart by roughly 3-2. For years, that natural spacing matters enormously. One of the most common findings in studies of early human groups is that kids are naturally spaced about 3 to 4 years apart. This is no fluke. It is nature's own rhythm. We were a species where nursing just one child to full independence before having another was strictly about survival. But this is where things get interesting. Wet nursing, or breastfeeding another person's baby, actually seems to be incredibly ancient and cross-cultural. Anthropological studies suggest that, across many societies, several women in a group would nurse babies who weren't theirs. This didn't just help Sick or orphaned infants survive, but also built powerful bonds between families in ways that probably offered huge survival advantages. It was, in a very real sense, a shared community resource. Let's look at this practically now. Imagine being a Pleistocene mother back in the Ice Age. You need to find food, likely walking several kilometers every day across rough wilderness. You must do all this while keeping a totally helpless baby alive, but how? You can't just lay them down. Predators are everywhere. Threats are constant. The baby can't regulate its own body heat. If it gets too cold, it can die incredibly fast. Besides, a crying baby left alone is a beacon for any meat eater in the area. The solution our ancestors found was simple, elegant, and is now backed by deep scientific research, constant physical contact, carrying babies close to the chest, what we now call baby wearing, seems to be the evolutionary norm for our species. This proof comes from several angles. Physically, human babies have a powerful cling reflex. The second you touch a newborn's palm, they squeeze instinctively with shocking strength. This reflex is actually a leftover habit that probably evolved for clinging to a parent. Inside a tiny baby's brain, everything is wired for close physical touch. Research shows that close skin contact helps stabilize their heart rate, breathing, body temperature, and stress hormones. Babies who get carried more cry less, not because they are spoiled, but because that touch meets a real biological need. Studies across different cultures show that in traditional societies where babies are carried all day long, crying is actually dramatically lower than in cultures where they spend hours alone, roughly 50% less. By some estimates, this crying is not a bad attitude. It is a simple reaction to things that a survival standpoint signal danger. Early human babies were almost always carried for the majority of their awake hours. They slept in direct touch with their parents. They were almost never left alone. Today's parenting advice, by contrast, has spent a whole century pushing the exact opposite. Cribs, separate rooms, strict schedules, sleep, training. Sure, some of this works, but you and I should remember we are, historical terms, running a pretty big and completely uncontrolled test on our own species. But sooner or later, that baby has to eat things besides milk, and that is when things get pretty creative and sometimes totally gross. The way ancient humans fed solid foods looks nothing like we would recognize. Unlike today, there were no pureed organic carrot pouches, definitely no perfectly balanced first foods. Instead, there was whatever the tribe managed to forage or hunt down, prepared in whatever way they could. The number one method for softening baby food in those early human communities was premastication. That means adults chewing food before passing it to the baby. Sounds pretty gross by modern standards. And yes, we know it actually shares bacteria from parent to child directly. But here is the twist. Some of those microbes are actually helpful. Studies suggest that babies who eat pre-chewed meals are introduced to healthy mouth microbes from their parents, which boosts their immune system. Plus, if you and I look at our primate cousins, wild chimpanzees, do it too? It is a deeply ancient habit and likely goes back millions of years. Aside from pre-chewing, ancient kids ate other soft things pretty early on, like rich marrow from cracked bones, calorie-dense and very easy to swallow. Also, mashed plants, eggs, and bits of fish or meat. Their diet was surprisingly diverse. Let's look at fossilized teeth. It tells us that kids in foraging tribes actually had way better nutrition and fewer cavities than the farming communities who relied heavily on starchy grains. Seriously, did hunter-gatherer kids actually have better teeth than Bronze Age kids? It turns out eating everything was way healthier than just munching bread. Now, here is something nobody tells you about our ancestors' real sleep setup. Nobody slept alone. We actually teased this idea before, but it seriously deserves its own spotlight because it is so incredibly different from modern expectations. In every single hunter-gatherer society and in the vast majority of traditional cultures worldwide, babies and toddlers sleep in direct physical contact with at least one adult, not in a separate room nor in a crib, but snug against someone all night. This habit, called co-sleeping or bed sharing, is not some counterculture parenting trend. It is the baseline human behavior for 99% of our species history. The warnings against it in modern Western medicine are based on very specific and real concerns, especially the risk of accidental suffocation on soft bedding with heavily impaired caregivers. And those are valid concerns in our modern world. But in ancient environments, sleeping on firm ground with alert and responsive parents in cool conditions, those same dangers do not apply the exact same way. Plus, the benefits of co-sleeping for baby development are deeply researched. Steadier body temperatures, much more regulated breathing, and frequent late-night nursing, plus majorly longer periods of breastfeeding overall. There is also a fascinating theory about co-sleeping and SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. A few researchers, like anthropologist James McKenna, who spent decades studying baby sleep patterns, believe that the quiet rhythm of a sleeping parent nearby, breathing and shifting, actually helps regulate a baby's own breathing during those critical early months when their own body is unpredictable. Now, whether that specific idea is fully proven, the main point stands. Human baby biology actually evolved expecting close contact while sleeping. Having a separate nursery is actually a brand new invention, and baby survival rates through most of history are proof enough to show us that for thousands of years something was working. Let's be totally honest here. For most of human history, baby mortality was incredibly high by our modern standards. The best estimates suggest that in early prehistoric groups, around 30 to 50% of children died before age 5. But this wasn't because those ancestors didn't care. They were simply living without any germ theory, antibiotics, vaccines, or even modern nutrition science, and without the healthcare advances that have cut child deaths by 96% since 1800. Yet they adapted, and some of their tools actually worked. Using healing plants is incredibly ancient. Even chimps self-medicate with certain plants, and archaeological sites show clear evidence of deliberate herb use going back 50,000 years. Over time, human cultures developed vast botanical guides full of natural herbal remedies that you and I still mine for modern medicine. Take willow bark, the original aspirin. It has helped manage pain and nasty fevers for thousands of years. Honey was the perfect ancient wound healer in Egypt and probably even earlier. Garlic has genuine antibacterial qualities that our ancestors actually figured out long before they could ever explain the science. But none of this saved kids from bacterial meningitis or severe dehydration. But it was something. But what else did they have? Rituals were everywhere. Just about every historical culture has created ceremonies for newborns, like naming rites, special blessings, protective charms, prayers, and rites of passage. To you and me, this might seem like pure superstition, but experts argue they had real social benefits. They brought the community together to support the child. They shared responsibility out loud for the kid's well-being. They offered ways to process the heavy grief when children inevitably passed, and you can tell their grief was completely real. Infant burials in historic dig sites are carefully arranged, sometimes holding precious toys, or even simple flowers. This idea that ancient parents were cold to their children's deaths, or that life was so cheap that loss was shrug off, is totally proven wrong by our historical record everywhere. They mourned, they tried, and slowly, over thousands of years, they built up real, life-saving knowledge to slowly tilt the odds. But here is the twist that nobody ever expects. Much of what our ancestors did to keep babies alive was actually more effective than what we use today. Not everything, obviously, absolutely not everything. Vaccines, clean drinking water, modern medicine. Those are not debatable. The massive drop in child mortality during the 20th century is one of our most remarkable achievements in human history, period, and nobody sane is saying we should go back to 40% child mortality, but within the world of social parenting habits, the emotional, physical, and social world of early childhood, there is a strong argument that modern societies have completely torn down systems that were doing vital work without really understanding what we were breaking. Take the extended family network that once shared child care among several adults. In so many Western countries, families are isolated and nuclear now, often scattered miles apart, sometimes completely isolated. The constant physical touch throughout the day, replaced by mechanical swings, bouncers, and playpens, gadgets specifically designed to keep the baby happy without being held. The shared family bedroom, replaced by isolated nurseries and a cultural obsession with early independence that, from an evolutionary perspective, is actually pretty bizarre. None of this is a moral failing. It is just the outcome of massive economic and societal shifts, rapid urbanization, the two-income household, and the collapse of extended family networks. These shifts happened for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with raising children, and parents navigating this are doing their absolute best. But the rates of postpartum depression, baby sleep struggles, and parental burnout in modern societies are real, proven, and shockingly high. And if you look at the social structure these parents are stuck in and compare it to the structure humans actually evolved for, the gap is enormous. The ancient answer to how do you keep a baby alive was you don't do it alone, you don't even mostly do it as a couple, you do it as a group. You share the load, you spread the sheer exhaustion, you make sure no single adult is ever the single point of failure. For a child's survival, that's not a philosophy, that's engineering. So, how did ancient humans keep kids alive? They carried them constantly. They nursed them for years. They slept right beside them every night. They pre-chewed their food for them. They surrounded them with a network of attentive adults, grandmothers, aunts, and uncles, neighbors, and friends, who all took real responsibility for that child's well-being. They grieved when children died, which happened so often. They tried to understand sickness with the basic tools they had, which were limited. They created rituals to hold their communities together in the face of grief. They slowly gathered knowledge across generations, passing it on through sacred traditions, daily practices, and eventually, much later on, writing. And the common thread running through all of this, the single most consistent thing across every culture, every time period, and every region, is that kids survived when they were rooted in deep social connections and really suffered when they were isolated. That is not ancient history. It is still true. We have designed remarkable technology to keep our young children physically safe. We have made incredible progress fighting the biological threats that once took half of all children before they could even walk to school. That is truly, deeply wonderful. But the social side of things, that tight, overlapping, highly connected network of loving care that our species spent Hundreds of thousands of years building. Well, we are still figuring out how. To protect that, our ancient ancestors had no antibiotics. They did not have high-tech ultrasounds. They had no formula, pediatricians, or car seats. What they had was each other, and as it turns out, for the things that really matter the most, that was enough.